Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farba. As the EU's chief diplomat Kaja Kallas and Poland's foreign minister Radosław Sikorski meet with Norway's leadership at the Oslo Security Conference, the Arctic is becoming the focus point for many nations. Now, Russia and China are consolidating their control. Now, NATO is scrambling, and the melting ice caps open new shipping routes and resource corridors that could reshape global trade. And joining the discussion now is Rasmus Gjedssø Bertelsen, professor of Northern Studies at UiT, Arctic University of Norway. Good to have you back on TVP World, Professor.
Good morning.
So there's this focus on the Arctic. We talk often about Arctic security. So just let's step back for a moment. What does that really mean? Is that deterrence? On what level? And why this accelerated interest now in the Arctic?
Well, the Arctic has been important to international security for a long time, and it's actually quite stable, and it is mainly about nuclear deterrence. The Arctic during the Cold War was central to mutual nuclear deterrence between the United States and the Soviet Union, and the Arctic remains central to mutual nuclear deterrence between Russia and the United States. And mutual nuclear deterrence, that is the point of gravity that decides most other things concerning Arctic security.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we talked of a nuclear deterrence there, but at the same time, it seems to be that there's now a renewed interest. Now, if we're looking at one factor, is it also in terms of global warming? If we're looking at how those ice caps are actually melting much faster, 4 times faster really than other parts of the world, how much is that also playing into this? And is it more than just nuclear deterrence now?
Well, the polar regions, they reflect global warming very much, and that has all kinds of both local and global environmental effects. And of course, one effect, as you mentioned, is the shrinking sea ice, and that opens these trade routes, the Northeast Passage, the Northern Sea Route, north of Russia, Northwest Passage, north of Canada. And these are, of course, these are sea routes that people have been looking for 500 years. But now, because of climate change, they are opening up.
Mm-hmm. And that opening up has also put in new interests. And you mentioned earlier it was between that deterrence between the United States and the Soviet Union. We now have also, let's say, a new player involved. We have China also there. I mean, that may not be military, but that's also very much about economics. Tell us a little bit about that, because we have information that there's renewed interest by the Chinese. If we're looking at that Yamal LNG project in northern Russia, China owns a significant stake there. So what is China's role in all this?
Well, China is, of course, an enormous country, and therefore China together with the United States, is one of the world's 2 by far largest national economies, one of the world's 2 by far largest national science and technology systems with the United States. So Chinese economics, business, science, technology is present all over the world, like American, and also in the Arctic. And world politics today is very much driven by relations between the United States, Russia, and China. And the United States and Russia, they have very conflictual relations. The United States and China has very conflictual relations. And that basically drives Russia and China into each other's arms. Russia has enormous natural resources, especially in energy, oil, gas. China, enormous population, enormous economy. China imports enormous amounts of energy, enormous amounts of commodities. China has very important energy security problems. China buys a lot of oil, gas, which travels on seas controlled by the US Navy. And there, of course, for China, Russia is a safe and reliable energy provider. Mm-hmm. So that's also why China invests a lot in Russian Arctic oil and gas resources.
Yeah, and on that energy front, I just want to share also with our audience this and get your view on it. I mean, if we're looking at the Russian Federation, roughly 50% of the Arctic coastline, that's what it controls, largest Arctic military force. We're looking at energy, like you said, 20% of its oil, 75% of its gas reserves in that region. If we look at that kind of statistics, I think also 35.7 trillion cubic meters of natural gas in its Arctic territory. It sounds like the West is already on the back foot and behind. How can we catch up, if at all?
Well, I mean, how to say, we don't actually, there's not really conflicts in the Arctic, but conflicts outside the Arctic, they spread to the Arctic. So we have the horrible war in Ukraine. And of course, the horrible war in Ukraine has led to a almost complete disruption of economic, scientific, diplomatic, people-to-people relations between the Nordic, North American half of the Arctic and the Russian half of the Arctic. So we don't have any economic, we have very little economic exchange, scientific exchange, etc., etc. But I don't think we have to be so concerned about, I mean, in a way, what can we do to catch up with all the oil and gas that happens to be in Russian waters and on Russian land? But if I can just return to what we talked about a moment ago, the role of the Arctic for mutual nuclear deterrence. So I'm here in Tromsø, northern Norway. The Kola Peninsula is, I think, 500 kilometers from here. And the Kola Peninsula is home to the Russian Northern Fleet, which is absolutely crucial for Russian nuclear deterrence. And of course, you have massive American military intelligence attention to the Russian Northern Fleet, and before that, the Soviet Northern Fleet. So that's why you have such a level of military and intelligence activity in the part of the world where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think that's an interesting one. Also, a significant conference, I think, happening where you are over the next few days. But I want to just go on what you've said, that the spark of conflict can come from the outside and not necessarily in the Arctic. But if we now have, for instance, we have Norway as a NATO member state, we have now new members like Sweden and Finland. I mean, large territory, but not necessarily big populations. How does that all factor in? And I want to share with you just one quick phrase from the Sakar, the head of NATO's Strategic Command Europe, who said just in the past few weeks that the Arctic is already a front line for strategic competition. So if we have words like that, and these countries like the Scandinavian countries in there, do they have, let's say, enough? Is there enough deterrence now with Russia at its doorstep? I mean, they've recently joined, but what is needed to up that deterrence, or can it only be done with the Americans?
Well, I think, well, it is the balance between deterrence and not ending up in what's called a security dilemma with the counterpart, where both sides feel increasingly threatened. And there, I think Norway, throughout the Cold War, pursued a very sophisticated policy where Norway was, of course, NATO member, its national defense, etc., but Norway did not allow, and still does not allow, permanent foreign bases or basically U.S. nuclear weapons. And there, Norway has a very, very deep intelligence collaboration with the United States. Norway and the United States has a very, very valuable, very important intelligence collaboration in northern Norway, in the waters up here, and that is striking the balance between deterrence and reassurance. Mm-hmm. And I think it's incredibly important to keep that balance, and it's incredibly important to understand the role of this region here, especially for mutual nuclear deterrence.
Mm-hmm. And also speaking more of military matters that scale out to Greenland, I mean, this came from the German defense minister just last week, a few days ago, about talking about this Arctic Sentry mission under NATO. Now Pistorius hinted that there would be U.S. involvement. How realistic do you think that is? How quickly can this be off the ground? And what kind of significance will that play in all this moving into the Arctic?
Well, I mean, Greenland is actually a very different and very separate matter from the Barents region, northern Norway, Kola Peninsula, where I am now. Because, of course, Greenland, on the one hand, Greenland, throughout the Cold War, continues, is very, very important for U.S. early warning, missile defense, space security, etc. It's the Pitufik space base in northern Greenland. But how to say, it basically doesn't make much sense to send NATO troops there to guard anything. I mean, what has happened also, the Danish military reinforcements that arrived in Greenland some weeks ago, French, Scandinavian, German, etc., officers, men, that was basically part of this bizarre situation created by Donald Trump's personal interest in Greenland. So there we have very strange things going on, which are not about, for example, the mutual nuclear deterrence between the United States, Russia, and China, but in my view, are explained by the personality of the U.S. president.
But at the same time, I mean, with, let's say, the way he did it, it definitely will be seen as controversial. But because he's put so much pressure on the Greenland issue, do you think that this may be taken as now more attention by other NATO allies? Will they now do more, not just in Greenland, but put the Arctic more on a higher priority list because of what he's done?
Well, there's no doubt that there is renewed attention to the Arctic, but that's nothing special about the Arctic. I mean, there was massive attention to the Arctic during the Cold War. Then the United States wins the Cold War, the Soviet Union disappears, Russia is so weakened, and that's why there was much less military attention to the Arctic. That's why we had much more benign situation in the Arctic. Now Russia has returned as a traditional Eurasian great power. China is returning to its historical position as one of the world's largest economies and science and technology actors. And as I mentioned before, that interaction between the United States, Russia, and China, which drives so much in European affairs and world affairs and Asian affairs, that is also driving things in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm. All right, so renewed interest by many nations, many great powers, and that was not going to go away anytime soon. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure having you on the program, Professor Rasmus Gjedssø Bertelsen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.